Picture this. It is 1981, somewhere in the middle of a Plasmatics concert, and a car is on fire. Not a prop, an actual car, center stage, in front of a crowd that cannot tell if they are watching music or a demolition or something that has no name yet. Wendy O is standing in front of it wearing a mohawk, a leather strap, and absolutely nothing else. And she is not performing destruction. She is enacting something closer to a sermon. Earlier in the same set, she took a chainsaw to a guitar. Not a broken guitar. A working one, mid-riff, while the crowd was still processing the sound. Before that, television sets, dragged on stage and smashed with a sledgehammer until they were unrecognizable pieces of what they had been. The audience, those who stayed because some people left, was not watching entertainment. They were watching a woman who had decided that the world needed to be shaken open, and that she was the person to do it. Nobody in that room looked away, and then, one day she stopped. She moved to a small house on the edge of a Connecticut forest. She volunteered at an animal shelter. She raised chickens. She fed squirrels by hand, in the quiet, among the trees. That is the question I want to ask tonight. Not about the explosions, not about the chainsaws, not about any of the things that made her famous. What happened after? Who she was in the silence. And why, in 1998, at 48 years old, the quiet was the thing that finally broke her. I'm Marlo. This is She Burned Bright. Subscribe and hit the bell if this is your first time here. Wendy Orlean Williams was born in 1949 in Rochester, New York. What her early home life was like, she rarely spoke about in detail. But what we know is this. By 16, she had left. Not with money, not with a plan, not with anyone waiting for her at the other end. She was hitchhiking across the country alone, a teenager without a safety net, figuring it out as she went. And she figured it out. She worked as a lifeguard. She worked as a cook. She worked as a stripper. She worked as a waitress at Dunkin' Donuts, serving coffee to people who had no idea who they were sitting across from. She cycled through jobs and cities and situations that would have broken someone who was running away from something. But she was not running away. The people who knew her later were clear on that. She was looking for something. She was a person of enormous internal force, who had not yet found the container large enough to hold what she was. In 1976, she found it. She answered an ad in New York City, Rod Swenson's Sex Fantasy Theater. And in Rod Swenson, she found not just a manager, not just a creative partner, but the one person who seemed to understand exactly what she was capable of and exactly what she needed to become it. Rod did not try to make her smaller. He did not try to make her more palatable or more commercial or more digestible to audiences who might be frightened by what she was. He helped her build a stage large enough to hold what she was, and what she was something the world had not seen before. Together they formed the Plasmatics. They debuted at CBGB in 1978, and nothing that came after was ever quite the same. What the Plasmatics were doing was not music in any conventional sense. It was a philosophy delivered at extreme volume. They released New Hope for the Wretched in 1980 and Beyond the Valley of 1984 in 1981, albums that the mainstream music press did not know how to categorize because they had not built categories for something this deliberately confrontational. The songs were not background noise. They were arguments. They were accusations. And on stage, those arguments became physical, became literal. Television smashed because television was making people passive. Cars demolished because consumer culture was making people numb. Guitars chainsawed mid-song because even the instruments of rock and roll had become a product somebody else was selling. Wendy said it plainly in interviews, without irony or self-aggrandizement. I want people to realize what's being done to them. I want them to wake up. She was wearing a mohawk, an electrical tape, and a leather strap while she said this, standing in front of a burning vehicle. And somehow she made it sound like the most reasonable thing anyone had ever said. Because it was. Because the spectacle was not separate from the message. The spectacle was the message. The extreme was not extreme for its own sake. The extreme was necessary, she believed, because ordinary means had failed to wake anyone up. She was doing the only thing that she thought could work. And when you understand that, the performance stops looking like chaos and starts looking like one of the most coherent artistic statements of the decade. The New York punk scene in 1978 and 1979 thought of itself as radical. The Plasmatics made most of it look decorative by comparison. Some audiences loved them immediately, the ones who understood that what was happening on stage was real, that the destruction was intentional, that the woman at the center of it was not a curiosity, but a force. Others were genuinely terrified, not because they were in danger, but because they were watching something that did not leave room for ironic distance. And ironic distance was how most people in that era managed to engage with anything that mattered. And then the mainstream tried to punish her for it. In 1981, in Milwaukee, police arrested Wendy O. Williams after claiming that she had simulated a sex act on stage. She disputed the characterization. The charges against her were eventually dropped, because the charges were not really about what they said they were about. They were about the fact that a woman with a mohawk was standing in front of crowds of thousands of people and telling them that everything they had been handed was broken, and some people in positions of authority found that threatening. What the press coverage largely failed to mention, failed even to report in many cases, was that during the arrest, a detective physically beat her. This was documented. There are accounts, there are witnesses. She was assaulted by a law enforcement officer in the course of an arrest that was itself politically motivated. The mainstream press was more interested in whether she was obscene than in whether she had been beaten. The double standard required no subtlety to see. What she was doing on stage was not categorically different from what male artists were doing every night without consequence. The men who smashed equipment were eccentric. The woman who smashed equipment was a criminal. She kept going. She released solo albums through the early 1980s. She appeared on the covers of Cream and Circus and in interviews where she was almost always smarter than the people questioning her. She toured, she refined, and in 1985, the Recording Academy nominated Wendy O. Williams for a Grammy Award for Best Female Rock Vocal Performance. That nomination has always seemed to me to contain a genuine reckoning, hiding inside an apparent absurdity. Because on the surface, a Grammy nomination for the woman who chainsawed guitars is funny, is incongruous, is almost satirical. But underneath that surface is the truth. She was that good. She had always been that good. The voice that delivered those performances was not incidental to them. It was extraordinary, capable of a range and a rawness that most vocalists spend careers trying to approximate. The intelligence behind the performances was not incidental either. She had thought carefully, deliberately, philosophically about everything she was doing. The Grammy nomination was absurd only if you had not been paying attention. If you had been paying attention, it was overdue. But the world was already moving on without her. The Plasmatics disbanded. The era of theatrical destruction, that particular form of it, that deliberate and philosophically grounded assault on the senses, gave way to other things. New sounds, new faces, new versions of extreme that had none of the intentionality of what she had built. Wendy and Rod moved to Storrs, Connecticut, a small house, a forest at the edge of the property, animals everywhere. She volunteered at the local animal rescue organization. She raised chickens. She became, in her private life, a person of genuine and patient gentleness, someone who had always cared, quietly and seriously, about creatures the world ignored. She fed squirrels by hand. She sat with them in the quiet. She tended things, but she was not built for quiet. Not because she was reckless or because she needed chaos, but because the Plasmatics had not been a performance she put on and took off. They had been the truest version of herself she had ever found. The stage, the noise, the physical intensity, the absolute certainty that what she was doing mattered and that people were in the room feeling it. That had not been a career. It had been the only way she had ever been fully, completely, recognizably herself. And without it, she could not find herself anywhere else. Rod Swenson said it directly later. She had found it extraordinarily difficult to exist at a level below maximum intensity. Her name stopped appearing in magazines. She was yesterday's extreme, the thing that had been too much for its moment, and was now simply too old for the next one. She began to disappear, not by dying, but by being forgotten. And for someone who had spent her life insisting that people wake up and pay attention, being forgotten was its own kind of violence. In 1993, she attempted to take her own life. She drove a knife toward her heart. The blade lodged in her sternum. Something stopped her, some part of her that was not ready, that still reached toward something. She stopped. She called Rod. He took her to the hospital. She survived. In 1997, she tried again, an overdose. She survived again. She survived once. And then, one more time, she tried again. On April 6, 1998, Wendy O. Williams was found near her home in Storrs, Connecticut. She was 48 years old. Rod Swenson, who had been her partner and collaborator for more than 20 years, the man who had understood her better than anyone, said publicly that she had been despondent for a long time, that she had never found a way to be the person she was without the world that had made her possible. She left a note. In it, she spoke about having lived fully. She spoke about the animals. She spoke about a world that had not been large enough for what she contained. I want to be careful about how I say the next part, because it is easy to flatten this into simple tragedy, and I do not think that is honest. Wendy O. Williams was not a cautionary tale. She was not destroyed by her excesses or by her extremity or by anything she chose. She was extraordinary in both directions, as a destroyer and as a nurturer, as the woman with the chainsaw and the woman feeding squirrels in the quiet of a Connecticut morning. The world had room for one of those versions of her. It did not have room for both. It did not even try. What she had wanted her whole career was for people to wake up. She said it in 1980. She said it in 1985. She was still saying it when no one was listening anymore. A lot of people are still asleep. She is owed more than nostalgia. She is owed more than occasional retrospectives and punk history footnotes and the occasional clip shared on the internet because someone finds the chainsaw funny without understanding what the chainsaw meant. She was nominated for a Grammy once. The Recording Academy saw something in her that year. Maybe by accident, maybe not. She was good enough for that. She was good enough for more than that. I keep coming back to the image of the squirrels, not the cars, not the explosions. The squirrels in the Connecticut woods, approaching her outstretched hand with small, careful steps because she had earned their trust. That was who she was, someone who believed in caring for things the world ignores, someone who thought, at a fundamental level, that the creatures nobody else paid attention to deserved to be fed and seen and kept warm. She said she wanted people to wake up. The squirrels were awake. She was the one who was there with them, in the quiet, when no one else was watching. If this story stayed with you, there is more where it came from. Every woman on this channel burned in her own way, and every story is different, and every one of them deserves to be told without flinching. Subscribe if you haven't yet. I'm Marlo. This is She Burned Bright. I'll see you in the next one.